Hello everyone, this is Dr. Hauk with a discussion of reading number 9, The Pig Lovers and Pig Haters. We'll start with the pig haters. I'll talk about the pig haters a bit in general terms, then we'll read a few passages in your reading, and then I'll handle the pig lovers the same way. All right, well, first of all, the pig haters, the people who have taboos against consuming pork are Jews and Muslims. It comes from the book of, from Leviticus in Judaism, and the Quran also echoes the same sentiments about the swine being unclean. And it's long puzzled people regarding why that's the case. Now, this is a culture materialist analysis. Let me emphasize that, right? This is Marvin Harris's writings, and so we're dealing with cultural materialism. So adjust your perspective in that way. So clearly, the religious explanation is going to be the most derived, and so therefore cultural materialists are going to look elsewhere. Well, as I said, people have for a long time been trying to understand why pork is taboo in Judaism and Islam. Well, I guess as I mentioned a while ago, the simplest answer would be that God says it's unclean. But that, of course, doesn't get us very far, because it just sort of begs the question, well, why? What's the deal with pigs? Out of all the animals out there, why pick on pigs? Well, sometime in the Middle Ages it was discovered that a person can actually contract trichinosis from eating pork. And at that point people thought, aha, now we have the answer. God, in God's infinite wisdom, knew that people would get sick eating pork, and so therefore that's why there was this prohibition. But actually that doesn't work very well either, for a couple of reasons. First, cows, sheep, goats, and other livestock actually carry anthrax, which is infinitely more deadly and fatal than trichinosis. And pigs don't carry anthrax. So that's kind of curious. Another point is that you could go 10 lifetimes eating pork all the time and never get sick once. And that's because if you handle pork properly, it's not a problem. And then trichinosis is not fatal. So in other words, the whole trichinosis explanation is not very good either. So we turn to cultural materialism, and as Harris points out, you did the reading, right? If you look at the ancient Middle East, where they practiced nomadic pastoralism, in other words, the herding of animals that gets moved around with the seasons, you'll see that pig farming doesn't fit very well at all. You can't herd pigs. Also, too, the environment is totally wrong for pigs. Pigs need a shady, moist environment. They don't have sweat glands. That's why they're always covering themselves with mud and so forth. And the Middle East is hot and dry. So there's environmental issues. Then finally, pigs eat a lot of what humans eat. So actually, it's just a sound ecological strategy that people began to realize thousands of years ago, well before it was ever written down in any scripture. So we'll read a couple of passages here in the text, and this is on page 40. 6 lines from the bottom of page 40. I think that the Bible and the Quran condemned the pig farming because pig farming was a threat to the integrity of the basic cultural and natural ecosystems of the Middle East. In other words, it was just a terrible fit. Pardon me, I'm sipping coffee. Look at page 41, the first indented paragraph. Within the overall pattern of this mixed farming and pastoral complex, the divine prohibition against pork constituted a sound ecological strategy. The nomadic Israelites could not raise pigs in their arid habitats, while for the semi-sedentary and village farming population, pigs were more of a threat than an asset. But here's something that's curious, though, because if there wasn't a temptation to eat pork, there'd be no cause for a prohibition. Well, look at page 43. The paragraph that starts, sheep and goats were, drop down 4 lines. Bone counts conducted by archaeologists at early prehistoric village farming sites show that the domesticated pig was almost always a relatively minor part of the village fauna, constituting only about 5% of the food animal remains. This is what one would expect of a creature which had to be provided with shade and mud holes, couldn't be milked, and ate the same food as man. So in other words, people were eating pork because, as you know, it's a very succulent, protein-rich meat that you can smoke and store and so forth and salt away. So there was a temptation there. And he addresses that on page 44, second indented paragraph. As in the case of the beef-eating taboo, the greater the temptation, the greater the need for divine interdiction. This relationship is generally accepted as suitable for explaining why the gods are always so interested in combating sexual temptations such as incest and adultery. Here I'm merely applying it to a tempting food. The Middle East is the wrong place to raise pigs, but pork remains a succulent treat. People always find it difficult to resist such temptations on their own. Hence Yahweh was heard to say that swine run clean, not only as food, but to the touch as well. And Allah, and this is later in the Quran, was heard to repeat the same message for the same reason, namely, it was ecologically maladaptive to try to raise pigs in substantial numbers. So there you go. There's a prohibition on pork because it was a sound ecological strategy, and it was no doubt in place for thousands of years before it was actually finally written down by someone in Leviticus in the Old Testament. All right, we turn now to the pig lovers. The pig lovers. And these are the Maring people, M-A-R-I-N-G, in Papua New Guinea. And they have a curious custom. Actually, it's more of a cycle that begins with a kaiko, K-A-I-K-O, which is a pig feast. So there's a cycle, so I'm going to start the cycle there and review the steps and come back around to the kaiko. The whole cycle lasts about 12 years. As I said, the kaiko is a pig festival, so to speak, where they will invite potential allies and friends over to gorge themselves on pigs. And this lasts about a year. There's a massive pig slaughter that goes on for about a year where people gorge themselves and party and so forth. And then following the Keiko, there is warfare with a neighboring clan that lives across the frontier. Now please understand, there are pockets of clans and they're separated by a frontier. Now during this warfare with this neighboring clan, they will continue to pray to the ancestors and sacrifice pigs for the ancestors, which is actually the name of the book by the anthropologist who wrote about this, Pigs for the Ancestors. But once the pig supply begins to run very low, they will stop the fighting and they will plant a truce tree called a rumbim, R-U-M-B-I-M, a rumbim tree, and then begins an extended period where everyone will start to raise pigs again. In other words, they'll try to replenish their pig supply. And that goes on and on and on until they get to the point where as you read, there are so many pigs that the men are working so hard planting gardens to feed them, and the women are working so hard with all the pigs they have to tend to and nurture that people are just about to lose their mind at some point. And then that's when they begin a new kaiko. So that's the cycle. So it seems kind of bizarre, but the key to the whole thing is that it lasts 12 years. It lasts 12 years. Now, what's key about that is that is precisely the length of time that a tract of land must lie fallow, F-A-L-L-O-W, in order to regenerate itself after it's been planted on. They do practice slash and burn agriculture, which is important for you to understand. So they practice slash and burn agriculture. So it's not an accident that the feed cycle is 12 years and the fallow period is 12 years. What will happen as a result of warfare is that the winners will advance into a frontier that has been unoccupied. And the losers will retreat to a frontier that's been unoccupied or has been regenerating itself for about 12 years. So what we have here is really an interesting land conservation sort of strategy. It's not the case that they necessarily consciously are aware of this, but that's how it works out. So there's a land conservation strategy in place here that has them forming one area until they leach the soil of all the nutrients, and then as a result of advancing or retreating in warfare, they move into frontier areas that have been left unoccupied or fallow for 12 years. So that's one function of the kaiko cycle. Another function of the kaiko cycle is that in warfare-oriented tribal societies, there's a premium placed on males because they fight the wars. Right? No group we've ever known of actually sends exclusively women out to fight their wars. Men physically just tend to be a bit stronger, a bit faster. So it sort of makes sense. So when there's a premium placed on males, then what you have is a selective neglect of females. Not outright infanticide, but rather a selective neglect. So in other words, they will tend to the young, the little male toddlers much more so than the female toddlers. And because of that, just that incremental difference in care, what you have is a sex ratio that is greatly disproportional towards males. One group, the Yanomamo, that practices this has a sex ratio of 100 males to 50 females. Just to give an example. So getting back to then, what is the function of this? Well, the function of this is population control, because clearly if you want to control population, you must control the females, not the males. Males are relatively insignificant when it comes to the population and population rate and birth rates and so forth. It's females. The fewer the females, the fewer the lower the birth rate. And then finally, as it turns out, given the mechanics of the cycle, just before a time of great stress and warfare, the men are getting a huge influx of protein. So that's the third function of the kaiko cycle. And on page, there's a nice summary comment on page 48, the bottom of the top paragraph. Every part of this cycle is integrated within a complex self-regulating ecosystem that effectively adjusts the size and distribution of the Tsimbaga's human and animal population to conform to available resources and production opportunities. So once again, a very clever cultural materialist interpretation of a seemingly bizarre custom, the Kaiko cycle. What's especially important here is that you catch the three functions of the Kaiko cycle. And also, of course, I assume you did your reading. Okay, that's it. Thank you.